Hi, welcome to the Everything and Anything in a Bit Gay podcast. Today on my podcast, I have Robert Kesten. He's a human rights advocate. He's also the executive director of the Stonewall National Museum of Archives and Library, and they're located in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So, welcome to the show, Robert.
Thank you.
So, Robert, tell me, did you have a busy month this June with Pride Month running the Stonewall Museum?
We did. We opened our exhibit on June 1st, which was a replica of the Stonewall Inn as it would have looked on June 28th, 1969.
Wow.
So we had a bar and a jukebox and cigarette machines and
Okay.
you name it, it was there. And we have had hundreds of people go through the exhibit. And then this past Saturday, June 29th, we had the first anywhere in the world reenactment of the Stonewall Uprising.
Wow.
And we had maybe 400 people show up to be part of the protests and to get arrested. And we had 8 or 9 different police departments represented.
Okay.
And it was really sensational. And it was so exciting and so rewarding that we will probably repeat it next year.
Wow, that's amazing. And so did you video and document it, the process?
We did.
And would that be part of kind of the archives or the museum moving forward, just as you do it every year?
Absolutely.
Great. Um, what type of visitors are you getting? Are you getting people from around the world coming to visit your museum and library?
Absolutely. They come from everywhere, from Japan to parts of Europe to Canada to South and Central America. There's no continent that has not visited.
And how did you pick Florida? Is that because that's where you were located at, and that's where it was? You know what?
Well, this organization is one of the first organizations that formed after the Stonewall Uprising.
Okay.
So it was formed in 1973
Okay.
by a 17-year-old based in Hollywood, Florida,
Oh.
who started the library. And when he went to college, he met someone who had started an archive, and they got together, and the Stonewall Library, which was the original name,
Yes.
became the Stonewall Library and Archive.
Okay.
And then when it got too big for 2 teenagers, they moved it to Fort Lauderdale, and a group of older people took over the growth of the organization.
Yeah, that's amazing that these kids that were 17 years old had that, that fire in them to do that. So that's pretty amazing.
It's amazing. And what's equally amazing is that we are now going into our 52nd year. And that means that we have carried the name Stonewall longer than any other institution that has used the name Stonewall, including Stonewall.
What do you kind of see do you see it kind of expanding? Have you ever thought about taking like some of this on a tour almost to show kind of some of the artifacts and stuff and just to tell the story more outside? Or do you kind of just rely on people coming to you or doing podcasts like this and possibly doing videos and putting it out on the internet? What's your kind of future?
Well, earlier this year, we were in Philadelphia with exhibits and New York with exhibits.
Awesome.
We're opening up a 6-month stay in New Orleans starting in October, where we'll have alternating exhibits. So we are already doing that. And then our Stonewall replica, which is over 400 square feet of building and bar and all those other things, will be going on a 10-year tour across the United States, starting with the 55th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising and culminating in June of, we're in 33, 34 for the 65th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising.
Yeah, so if you want to learn more about the Stonewall Museum, the website is stonewall-museum.org. So check it out. It has a lot of good information on it for you to take a look at. I also wanted to talk about a little bit. You worked on Ukraine's independence in your lifetime. So tell me how that got started. I mean, obviously Ukraine is top of the news in today's news, and how did you get involved with that, and how did it go?
Well, I got a phone call while I was sitting in my office asking me to be on the next flight to Paris. And then I was told to go to the Soviet consulate where I would get a visa. And then I arrived in Kiev, which was Kiev at the time, but now
Hmm.
Kiev. And someone met me at the airport with a sign that had my name on it and drove me on this dark, rainy road to an office building. And I went in, and the person who I met with announced that they were the deputy prime minister of Ukraine.
Okay.
And how would I help them leave the Soviet Union? So it was all rather interesting.
And how long were you there? How long were you in Ukraine, or were you just there to kind of get that person out almost?
Oh, no, it wasn't about getting someone out. It was about creating events and programming
Mm,
that invited people from all over the world to Ukraine to see them as what they might look like as an independent state.
I see.
And so I was there for parts of 90 and 91, including taking not elected, officials
Yeah.
from Ukraine to to the United States, to the Middle East, to introduce them to people outside of Ukraine. So it
And
was a long engagement.
was homosexuality illegal whenever you were there, 1991?
In the Soviet Union, it was illegal, and in all the Soviet republics, it was illegal.
Okay.
In Ukraine, it was punishable by prison or being sent into a mental institution.
Wow. And how did you help kind of decriminalize that in Ukraine?
Well, when I was there, they took me on a quick tour of the city, and one place we drove past was we went through a park.
Hmm.
And in the park, there was a boarded up building, which I could tell had been public restrooms. And it
Yeah.
was all boarded up. And I asked why. And they said because a certain element of people frequent it. And even when we send thugs in to beat them up, they come back. So we
Okay.
boarded it up. And I said, what kind of people is that? And they couldn't answer me. And so I said, if you want me to do this work for you,
Yeah.
then, and you want to become more affiliated with Western Europe, then you have to think like Western Europe,
Yeah.
and you have to decriminalize. And otherwise, I have a plane ticket and I can leave. And within a very short time, just a matter of days, the deputy prime minister came to see me, and in his hand was the legal document that decriminalized homosexuality in Ukraine while it was still a Soviet republic. And even now, while the war is going on there, they have liberalized laws and rules and regulations
Hmm.
regarding their community. So while Russia is retrenching, while Georgia is retrenching,
Yes.
while other parts of the former Soviet Union are moving backwards on rights, Ukraine is still moving forward.
Wow, that's amazing. Did anyone ever ask you your sexuality when you were in the Ukraine before this document was kind of handed to you?
No, because they would just never have even crossed their minds.
Okay, yeah, it just wasn't part of their everyday thinking. That's great. I mean, that's such an achievement though that you were there for that to give, people in the LGBTQ community, more of a freedom and not be criminalized for being who they are. So that's quite amazing.
I was very glad that people would no longer be sent to do hard labor,
Yeah,
go to a mental institution, or the like. It is one of the most rewarding things I think that I've ever done.
yeah. And then I also seen in your biography that you were the first, you opened the first AIDS day treatment center in the nation. So tell me a little.
I didn't open it. It was
Okay,
opened by the Village Nursing Home in New York City, but I
okay,
did the first major event that both raised money for it and really publicized it in a dramatic way.
that's awesome. And one of the topics I really wanted to talk about is book banning, which is something that I believe that you are part of or that you're against. I just read before we joined the podcast that in July to December of 2023 there was 4,349 books that were banned in the country, which is really insane. What do you think is making people the governments are like, I know DeSantis has got a big book ban in Florida. So what is driving this book ban now all of a sudden? I mean, there's always been book bans in the past and stuff, but this seems to be such an extreme and it seems to be so targeted towards LGBTQ plus books. What's your thoughts on that?
If you are looking for power, the easiest way to access power is to divide and conquer.
Mm-hmm.
And you go after the low-hanging fruit. And making people uncomfortable and unnerved by books in classrooms and school libraries is a really easy way to do that.
Yeah.
And this was purely a political move. It had nothing to do with education. It had nothing to do with socialization. This was an effort by people in power looking to accentuate their power, one for re-election and then to run for president.
Yeah.
And it's the worst reason to take away information. And we know information is power.
Yes.
And we know that when people are informed, they ask questions. And it's much easier to rule over a herd of sheep than it is over cats. And so there is a real deliberate effort to dumb down the society. And removing books is a real good first step to do that.
Yeah, there was a woman that there was a video that came out in October of 2022 where a woman went to Tennessee to Maury County, and she basically stood up and spoke to the county commissioners and the other politicians that were there, stating that they were so worried about taking away this Pride book stand that was in the library and that was funded, and she really called out some of the religious leaders that were there, talking about, I mean, her speech was just so powerful. It was a 2-minute and 20-minute speech, and she got every point across. And I'm just like, I was so proud of her for going in there, just for children, and just standing up for that and just saying that she wouldn't care if her kids, what sexuality they were, she's going to live them unconditionally. And it was such a powerful statement. I'm hoping that opens some minds up in the state of Tennessee, or at least in that county. You can always hope, but who knows? But it's just something that really, I've watched that video over and over because it's just so powerful. So, tell me a little bit about your how you're trying to get LGBT plus inclusion in schools and how you're navigating that.
Well, it's not that. What we're really looking to do is make sure that American history is complete.
Yeah.
And when you leave groups out, when you leave individuals out, when you leave movements out, you're not teaching history. And if we do not want to see over and over and over again the tragedy of hate, prejudice, and ignorance, then we have to do a much better job of instructing people on what truly happened and what is happening and why. And we only know where we are based on where we've come from. And that forms where we're going. And so we believe that this history, this culture needs to be included in curriculum along with Black history and Black culture, and Jewish history and Puerto Rican history and Mexican American history. All of those things must be included if we are going to have citizens that are citizens not only of this nation, but of the world.
Yeah.
And in a world that's getting smaller and smaller because of technology, it is really important to have access to that information, understand it, and understand how to learn from it.
Yeah.
And we're not doing that. We teach history as if it was a biography, or if it was a look at a place where the United States was victorious. And we don't really look at the complete picture. And one good example is, would there have been a John Adams who was the first vice president of the United States and the second president of the United States had there not been an Abigail Adams?
Yeah.
And we've discounted women's history
Yeah,
to a
definitely.
large extent. And so therefore, no very few Americans have a really well-rounded understanding of how to learn history, why it's important, and what it does to us as individuals when we see ourselves reflected in it.
Do you see this kind of spanning across? Not, I mean, obviously Florida is always in the news and Texas is always in the news when they're trying to not include this in the educational system. Do you see that kind of spreading even to more of the southern states like Mississippi and Alabama now, Louisiana? Or are, I mean, I feel like I'm in a bubble because I'm in the Boston area. So Massachusetts is pretty liberal, and we don't have as much of these types of issues happening in our state or the city. Um, but Florida, I mean, it's so prevalent there. And do you think that DeSantis will start to let up a little bit eventually on some of these bans? I mean, I see that he's pushed to the side a little bit here and there, but then you read something the next week and he's after something again. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the people who are using it for division and for political power will continue. But I think that it's a dangerous thing for people to think that it's relegated to red states or the South. There are people in New York and New Jersey
Hmm.
that in their red communities have tried
Yes.
to do the same thing. California has a lot of red districts that have pushed these issues. So in the bluest states, there is pushback and there are moves to ban books. There are moves to curtail certain things being taught in classrooms. So this is universal. And this is not even just germane to the United States. We see it
Yeah.
all over the world.
Right.
So I think that the LGBTQ community and other marginalized communities really do themselves a disservice when they relegate that
Hmm.
these things are only happening there, not here. They
Yeah.
can happen anywhere. And even in the bluest of blue places, the most liberal of liberal places, all it takes is one crisis to make people look for a scapegoat.
Yeah.
And people
Good point.
scapegoat the least frictionable, if
Hmm.
that's a word,
Yeah.
part of the population. And LGBTQ people, especially trans people of color, are often the first link in that chain.
Yes.
And when that starts getting pulled down, ultimately, lots of other things get pulled down with it. So we should be covering our softest flank.
Yeah.
We should be making sure that people understand what community means and that everybody is important in the community and everybody's story is part of the historic record.
That's really great. And I say that I'm in this liberal state, but there were books being banned in Massachusetts as well. So point taken very well. So that's you're absolutely right. I think that's a great piece of advice to not just like look at the red states because it's happening everywhere. So
Complacency is our worst enemy.
yeah, that's a really good lesson, I think. So well, thank you so much for being on. Is your website the best place for people to kind of learn about the museum, or do you have a YouTube channel or anything that people could go to?
We have YouTube, which is accessible through the website.
Okay,
We also have all the various social media channels,
great.
and all of that is available. And everyone is welcome to consider this their home away from home.
That's awesome. So stonewall-museum.org is the website. Check it out. If you are in South Florida, please stop by. And then also, Robert said they're doing some things around the country. So take a look at it. Go see the exhibit. I think it's fantastic what Robert has done with his life. And I really appreciate you for being on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.